Hey, it's #1 best-selling author and motivational speaker, Equalman. Most of you know me as Equalman. I'm super excited for today's thought leader. It's Brené Brown. And I love how she talks about vulnerability and shame. And again, what we're doing with these 7 super tips is we're highlighting people that have either inspired me or I've been blessed to share the stage with and have gotten to know. And so they've got some great thoughts that I think all of you need to know, and we've distilled them down to 7 super tips. And today's tips all come from Brené Brown.
If we're going to find our way back to each other, we have to understand and know empathy, because empathy is the antidote to shame. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. The 2 most powerful words when we're in struggle: me too. And so I'll leave you with this thought. If we're going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is going to be that path. And I know it's seductive to stand outside the arena, because I think I did it my whole life, and think to myself, I'm going to go in there and kick some ass when I'm bulletproof and when I'm perfect. And that is seductive. But the truth is, that never happens. And even if you got as perfect as you could and as bulletproof as you could possibly muster, when you got in there, that's not what we want to see. We want you to go in. We want to be with you and across from you. And we just want for ourselves and for the people we care about and the people we work with to dare greatly. So thank y'all very much. I really appreciate it. And so what I want to talk about today is the perspiration that no one talks about very often. And that's not the perspiration from the hard work and the laborious part of creating. It's the perspiration from fear, from the cold sweat, the stuff that pops up on our eyebrows when it's not supposed to be there because we're presenting an idea or talking about something that we care about. And then we're begging our body not to sweat. Like when they said, we're filming you against black, could you wear something else? I'm like, no. That 99% perspiration thing, I'm down with that. I got that. I'll be wearing, yes, my option will be navy. So I know about sweaty creatives. So I want to tell you about something that changed my life as a creative person. And it's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, and it has completely, I know it sounds cheesy and cliche to think a quote can change your life, but sometimes when you hear something, when you need to hear it and you're ready to hear it, something shifts inside of you. And so my story is that I am a researcher, and I never thought I would have a big public career. And so I did a TED Talk that went very viral. And in the wake of that, I was kind of everywhere for a couple of months, on every CNN.com, NPR. It was everywhere, and something I wasn't used to. And the marching orders from my therapist and my husband were, do not read the comments online. So I read all the comments online. And so one morning, I woke up and there were 2 or 3 new articles out, and I started reading the comments. And they were devastating. They weren't about my work, they were about me. They were super personal. And they were the things that creative people play in their mind and then give up doing what they really want to do. Like if I asked every single one of you, what would you try if you knew people would never say this about you? What would this be? Those were the comments that morning. Of course she embraces imperfection. What choice does she have? Look how she looks. I feel sorry for her kids. Less research, more Botox. Just mean personal attacks, the things that really, up until that moment, had inspired me to stay very small in my life and my career, just so I could avoid those things. So that morning, Steve and the kids leave. I stay home, I get on the couch, and I watch 8 hours of Downton Abbey. And when it's over, I don't want to turn off Downton Abbey. Because the minute you turn off Downton Abbey, then it's like soccer practice and dinner and back to the mean people, and maybe, should I get Botox? And maybe, maybe if I stand still when I talk. So I get out my laptop and I do a search for who was president in the United States during the Downton Abbey era. Have you ever done that? Like you're numbing with TV or a movie, and so when it's over, you just like stay in that space by like learning more about the actors and what's going on. I've been doing this long enough to know that this is like, you're laughing with me, not at me. So I put it in, and Theodore Roosevelt comes up, and a quote comes up. And I read it, and this is what it says. It's a quote from a speech that he gave in the early 1900s at the Sorbonne, and a lot of people call it the Man in the Arena speech. And this is the passage that changes my life. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and sweat and dust, who, at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who, at worst, if he fails daring greatly. So the moment that I read that, I closed my laptop, and this is what shifted in me. 3 huge things. First, I've spent the last 12 years studying vulnerability, and that quote was everything I know about vulnerability. It is not about winning, it's not about losing, it's about showing up and being seen. The second thing, this is who I want to be. I want to create. I want to make things that didn't exist before I touched them. I want to show up and be seen in my work and in my life. And if you're going to show up and be seen, there is only one guarantee, and that is you will get your ass kicked. That is the guarantee. That's the only certainty you have. If you're going to go in the arena and spend any time in there whatsoever, especially if you've committed to creating in your life, you will get your ass kicked. So you have to decide at that moment, I think for all of us, if courage is a value that we hold, this is a consequence. You can't avoid it. The third thing, which really set me free, and I think Steve, my husband, would argue has made me somewhat dangerous, is kind of a new philosophy about criticism, which is this. If you're not in the arena also getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. Period. That's it. If you have constructive information, feedback to give me, I want it. And I'm an academic. I'm hardwired for wrestling around with stuff like that. If you say, hey, you forgot all this literature, or hey, you should have done this, or terrible sentence construction over here, like, let's do it. I love that. But if you're in the cheap seats, not putting yourself on the line, and just talking about how I could do it better, I'm in no way interested in your feedback. So I know about the sweaty creative. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk very specifically about the arena. This is where we sweat. How many of you know this feeling by just looking at the picture? Yeah, show of hands. How many of you know this feeling? So this is what we do down here. Like, I don't know what you do down here, but what I set up camp down here. I like string up twinkle lights. I order takeout food. I live down here sometimes, just dreaming about the day that I come up and how awesome it's going to be. But I stay down here a lot. And here's what we do. The arena's right there. You can see it. The light's there. And the fear is this. I'm scared. A lot of self-doubt. Comparison, anxiety, uncertainty. And so what do most people do when they're walking into the arena and those things are going to greet them up top? What do? You armor up, right? This is where I would imagine the old days that they got all their stuff on. But God, that stuff is heavy, and that stuff is suffocating. And the problem is when you armor up against vulnerability, you shut yourself off And I've said this to audiences before, but I have never said it to an audience where it is more true than today, this second. When you armor up in this hallway, you shut yourself off from everything that you do and that you love. Because vulnerability is certainly a part of fear and self-doubt and grief and uncertainty and shame, but it's also the birthplace of these. It's the birthplace of love, of belonging, of joy, trust, empathy, creativity, and innovation. Without vulnerability, you cannot create. So what I think you're asked to do as a creative on a daily basis is walk through this hall, get to the top of the stairs, and get naked. Of course. Get naked. Get really real. Put yourself out there and walk out there so people can see you and see what you've made and see what you're doing. So when we walk out, this is what we see. Lots of seats, lots of people. But we focus in and we focus on this, the critics. I used to think the best way to put your work out into the world is to make sure the critics are not in the arena. But you have no control over who's in the arena. And the best way I have found is to know that they're there and to know exactly what they're going to say to you, because each of you know. The 3 seats that will always be taken when you walk into the arena, when you share your work with someone, the 3 seats that will always be taken are shame, scarcity, and comparison. Shame, completely universal human emotion. We all have it. It's that gremlin that whispers, you're not enough. Or if you're feeling pretty confident, like this is, I went through this like when Scott was talking, I went back and forth from like a ping pong table with gremlins, back from, oh my God, I'm not enough, to, I can do this, I can totally do, oh, who do you think you are? That's the other gremlin, that's how it works. Like, look at you, big for your britches. I clearly have Texas gremlins. I don't know that everyone says too big for their britches, but that's what my gremlins say. So shame always has a seat. The other seat that's always taken is scarcity. What am I doing what am I doing that's original? Everyone else is doing this. 150 people are doing it who are better trained than I am. What am I contributing? Does this really matter? The third seat, always comparison. How many of you ever struggle with comparison? Oh my God, comparison is a nightmare. You know, I made a pact not to talk to anyone in the green room because what I was afraid that I would end up doing is say, so what are you talking about? That's interesting because I'm going first. And so if it sounds super good, and I think I suck comparatively, I may say that. And then I'm catching a flight to Dallas. Comparison is always there. The 4th seat I left open for you. You got to know who's in the 4th seat. Is it a teacher? Is it a parent? Is it a shitty ex-coworker? Am I the only one that's ever had one of those? The thing is, I don't care what people think. I don't worry about the critics in the arena. Sends a huge red flag up for me. We're hardwired for connection. When we stop caring what people think, we lose our capacity for connection. When we become defined by what people think, we lose our capacity to be vulnerable. Not caring what people think is its own kind of hustle. Trust me. So rather than locking these folks out from the arena, what I'm going to invite you to do, this way maybe, is reserve seats for them, which doesn't seem like a good thing to do. But I have 13,000 pieces of data, and I've done this work for 12 years. And what I have found and what I have learned from these folks and then try to apply it in my own life that has changed my life is to reserve a seat, to take the critics to lunch, and to simply say when I'm trying to do something new and hard and original, and I'm trying to be creative and I'm trying to innovate, to say, I see you, I hear you, but I'm going to show up and do this anyway. And I've got a seat for you, and you're welcome to come, but I'm not interested in your feedback. The other piece that's tough is, to me, if you're going to spend your life in the arena, if you're going to spend your life showing up, really showing up, there's a couple things that you need. The first is a clarity of values. You have to, I know, when I came out here, I knew I could screw this completely up. I could get booed off stage, bad things could happen, but I don't have a choice, because if courage is my value, I have to do this. Whether it's successful or not is irrelevant. So a real clarity of values is important. The other thing is you got to have at least one person in your life who's willing to pick you up and dust you off and look at you when you fail, which hopefully you will, because if you're not failing, you're really not showing up. But who is willing to look at you when you fail and say, man, that sucked. Yeah, it was totally as bad as you thought. But you were brave. And let's get you cleaned up, and because you're going to go back in. And this is someone who loves you not despite your imperfections and vulnerabilities, but because of them. And they should have great seats in the arena. I forgot for for a decade, I forgot to invite these people into my arena. Because, it's the old, I always want to say Karl Marx, but it's Groucho Marx difference. I'm a social worker. We read a lot more Karl than Groucho. I didn't want to belong to a club that would let me in. I forgot to invite people because I thought, if you're my fan, if you're here supporting me, how important could you be? I'm trying to win over the people who hate me. You simply love me. You simply hold my hair back when I'm puking. You pay bills with me and raise kids with me. How important could you be? I'm looking for the stranger in the mall. That's who I'm trying to win over. Yes or no? Okay. The last part is, so I guess the real specific how-tos are this. The world keeps going, whether you know it or not. The critics are in the arena, whether you identify them and think about the messages that keep us small. They're there, whether you do that or not. What I have found in my life and what I've found in my research, which fueled what I did in my life, is that the people who have the most courage, who are willing to show up and be the most vulnerable, are the ones who are very clear about who the critics are. The ones who reserve seats for them and say, I hear you, I get it, I know where the messaging's coming from, I'm not buying it anymore. So to get very clear. The last thing, which I think is the hardest, is this. One of these seats needs to be reserved for you. One of these seats needs to be reserved for me. I need, when we look up and we're putting an idea, our piece of art, our design forward, who do you think the biggest critic in the arena normally is? Yourself. And so, definitely me. I have never watched either of those TED Talks. Because it's not in service of the work for me. And I try to do things that are only in service of my work, because what would it serve for me to watch it? I would sit there and go, oh my God, suck in your stomach. Oh my God, that's not what you were going to say. We're so self-critical. And one of the things that I think happens, and I think this happens a lot, it happens in different professions, but I think I see it a lot with creatives, is there is an ideal of what you're supposed to be. And what a lot of us end up doing is we orphan the parts of ourselves that don't fit what that ideal is supposed to be. And what it leaves when we orphan all those parts of us is it just leaves the critic. And so reserved in this seat is this: where we came from, how we started, our families, that's me, the oldest, of course, the lost years, the years where I was so lost and confused and hurt and disillusioned that I thought the only path to freedom was a flock of seagulls haircut. The higher the hair, the closer to God, we say in Texas. The people who love us, the moments that make us who we are. And in that share should be this person. The person who believes in what we're doing and why we're doing it. And the person who says, yeah, it's so scary to show up. It feels dangerous to be seen. It's terrifying. But it is not as scary, dangerous, or terrifying as getting to the end of our lives and thinking, what if I would have shown up? What would have been different? But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year has turned into 6 years, thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data, and 6 years. And I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is, this is how it works. I wrote a book, I published a theory, but something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness. That's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection, was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but that's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie. And I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder. And I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting. This led to a little breakdown, which actually looked more like this. And it did. It led to I call it a breakdown, my therapist calls it a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening sounds better than breakdown, but I assure you it was a breakdown. And I had to put my data away and go find a therapist. Let me tell you something. You know who you are when you call your friends and say, I think I need to see somebody. Do you have any recommendations? Because about 5 of my friends are like, woo, I wouldn't want to be your therapist. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm just saying, don't bring your measuring stick. It's like, okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down, and she said, how are you? And I said, I'm great, I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists, because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, I have a vulnerability issue, and I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness, but it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love, and I think I have a problem, and I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing, no family stuff, no childhood shit, I just need some strategies. Thank you. So she goes like this. And then I said, it's bad, right? And she said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is gonna suck. And it did, and it didn't. And it took about a year. And you know how there are people that, like, when they realize that vulnerability and tenderness are important, that they kind of surrender and walk into it? A, that's not me. And B, I don't even hang out with people like that. For me, it was a year-long street fight. It was a slugfest. Vulnerability pushed, I pushed back. I lost the fight, but probably won my life back. And so then I went back into the research and spent the next couple of years really trying to understand what they, the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability? No. So this is what I learned. We numb vulnerability. When we're waiting for the call, it was funny, I sent something out on Twitter and on Facebook that says, how would you define vulnerability? What makes you feel vulnerable? And within an hour and a half, I had 150 responses. Because I wanted to know, what's out there. Having to ask my husband for help because I'm sick and we're newly married. Initiating sex with my husband. Initiating sex with my wife. Being turned down. Asking someone out. Waiting for the doctor to call back. Getting laid off. Laying off people. This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. And I think there's evidence. And it's not the only reason this evidence exists, but I think that it's a huge cause. We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in U.S. history. The problem is, and I learned this from the research, that you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. I don't want to feel these. And I know that's knowing laughter. I hack into your lives for a living. I know that's, God. You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the other affects or emotions. You cannot selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy. We numb gratitude. We numb happiness. And then we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning. And then we feel vulnerable. So then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. And it becomes this dangerous cycle. One day, my daughter, Ellen, came home from school. She was in 3rd grade. And the minute we closed the front door, she literally just started sobbing and slid down the door until she was just kind of a heap of crying on the floor. And of course, it scared me. And I said, oh my, what's wrong, Ellen? What happened? What happened? And she pulled herself together enough to say, something really hard happened to me today at school, and I shared it with a couple of my friends during recess. And by the time we got back into the classroom, everyone in my class knew what had happened. And they were laughing and pointing at me and calling me names. And it was so bad, and the kids were being so disruptive, that her teacher even had to take marbles out of this marble jar. And the marble jar in the classroom is a jar where if the kids are making great choices together, the teacher adds marbles. If they're making not great choices, the teacher takes out marbles. And if the jar gets filled up, there's a celebration for the class. And so she said, it was one of the worst moments of my life. They were laughing and pointing, and Miss Balkin, my teacher, kept saying, I'm going to take marbles out, and she didn't know what was happening. And she looked at me, and she, just with this face that is just seared into my mind, and said, I will never trust anyone again. And my first reaction, to be really honest with you, was damn straight. You don't tell anybody anything but your mama. Yeah, right? That's it. I mean, that was my like, you just tell me. And when you grow up and you go off to school, mama will go too. I'll get a little apartment. And the other thing I was thinking, to be quite honest with you, is I will find out who those kids were. And while I'm not going to beat up a 9-year-old, I know their mamas. That's the place you go to. And I'm like, how am I going to explain trust to this 3rd grader in front of me? So I took a deep breath and I said, Ellen, trust is like a marble jar. She said, what do you mean? And I said, you share those hard stories and those hard things that are happening to you with friends who over time you filled up their marble jar. They've done thing after thing after thing where you're like, I know I can share this with this person. Does that make sense? And that's what Ellen said. Yes, that makes sense. And I said, do you have any marble jar friends? And she said, oh yeah, I totally. Hannah and Lorna are marble jar friends. And I said, and then this is where things got interesting. And I said, tell me what you mean. How do they earn marbles for you? And she's like, well, Lorna, if there's not a seat for me at the lunch cafeteria, she'll scoot over and give me half a Heine seat. And I'm like, she will? She's like, yeah, she'll just sit that like that, and so I can sit with her. And I said, that's a big deal. This is not what I was expecting to hear. And I said, then she said, and you know, Hannah, on Sunday at my soccer game, and I was waiting for this story where she said, I got hit by a ball, and I was laying on the field, and Hannah picked me up and ran me to first aid. And I was like, yeah? And she said, Hannah looked over, and she saw Oma and Opa, my parents, her grandparents, and she said, look, your Oma and Opa are here. And I was like, boy, she got a marble for that? And she goes, well, you know, not all my friends have 8 grandparents. Because my parents are divorced and remarried. My husband's parents are divorced and remarried. And she said, and it was so nice to me that she remembered their names. And I was like, And she said, do you have marble jar friends? And I said, yeah, I do have a couple of marble jar friends. And she said, well, what kind of things do they do to get marbles? And this feeling came over me, and I thought, the first thing I could think of, because we were talking about the soccer game, was that same game, my good friend Eileen walked up to my parents and said, Deanne, David, good to see you. And I remember what that felt like for me. And I was like, certainly, trust cannot be built by these small, insignificant moments in our lives. It's got to be a grander gesture than that. So, as a researcher, I start looking into the data. I gather up the doctoral students who've worked with me. We start looking, and it is crystal clear. Trust is built in very small moments. And when we started looking at examples of when people talked about trust in the research, they said things like, yeah, I really trust my boss. She even asked me how my mom's chemotherapy was going. I trust my neighbor, because if something's going on with my kid, it doesn't matter what she's doing, she'll come over and help me figure it out. You know, one of the number one things emerged around trust in small things? People who attend funerals. This is someone who showed up at my sister's funeral. Another huge marble jar moment for people, I trust him because he'll ask for help when he needs it. How many of you are better at giving help than asking for help? Right? So asking for help is one of those moments. So one of the ways I work as a grounded theory researcher is I look at the data first, then I go in and see what other researchers are talking about and saying, because we believe the best theories are not built on other existing theories, but on our own lived experiences. So after I had looked at this, I said, let me see what the research says. And I went to John Gottman, who's been studying relationship for 30 years. He has an amazing work on trust and betrayal. And the first thing I read, trust is built in the smallest of moments. And he calls them sliding door moments. Sliding Doors is a movie with Gwyneth Paltrow from the 90s. Have y'all seen this movie? So it's a really tough movie, because what happens is it follows her life to this seemingly unimportant moment where she's trying to get on a train. And she makes the train, but the movie stops and splits into 2 parts, where she makes the train and she doesn't make the train. And it follows them to radically different endings. And he would argue that trust is a sliding door moment. And the example that he gives is so powerful. He said he was lying in bed one night. He had 10 pages left of his murder mystery. And he had a feeling he knew who the killer was, but he was dying to finish this book. So he said, I want to get up, brush my teeth, go to the bathroom, and get back in and not have to get up. I just want, you know that feeling when you just want to get all situated and read the end of your book. So he gets up, and he walks past his wife in the bathroom who's brushing her hair, and who looks really sad. And he said, my first thought was, just keep walking, just keep walking. And how many of you have had that moment where you walk past someone, and you're like, oh God, avert your eyes. Or you look at caller ID or your cell phone, and you're like, oh yeah, I know, she's in a big mess right now. I don't have time to pick up the phone, right? Yes or no? This looks like guilty laughter to me. He said, that's a sliding door moment. And here's what struck me about his story. Because he said, there is the opportunity to build trust. And there is the opportunity to betray. Because as small as the moments of trust can be, those are the moments of betrayal as well. To choose to not connect when the opportunity is there is a betrayal. So he took the brush out of her hand and started brushing her hair and said, what's going on with you right now, babe? That's a moment of trust, right? So fast forward 5 years, and I'm clear about trust, and I talk about trust as the marble jar. We gotta really share our stories and our hard stuff with people whose jars are full. People who've, over time, really done those small things that have helped us believe that they're worth our story. Reliability. I can only trust you if you do what you say you're going to do, and not once. Reliability, let me tell you what reliability is in research terms. We're always looking for things that are valid and reliable. Any researchers here or research kind of geeks? There's 10 of us. Okay, so we would say a scale that you weigh yourself on is valid if you get on it and it's an accurate weight. 120. Okay. So that would be a very valid scale. I would pay a lot of money for that scale. So that's actually not a valid scale, but we'll pretend for the sake of this. That's a valid scale. A reliable scale is a scale that if I got on it 100 times, it's gonna say the same thing every time. So what reliability is you do what you say you're going to do over and over and over again. You cannot gain and earn my trust if you're reliable once, because that's not the definition of reliability. In our working lives, reliability means that we have to be very clear on our limitations so we don't take on so much that we come up short and don't deliver on our commitments. In our personal life, it means the same thing. So when we say to someone, oh God, it was so great seeing you, I'm gonna give you a call and we can have lunch. Yes or no? No. It was really great seeing you. Moment of discomfort, goodbye. Right? But honest. It's so hard. I thought doing this research, going into it, there were authentic people and inauthentic people. Mm-hmm. I did not find any evidence of that at all. What I found is authenticity is a practice, and you choose it every day, sometimes every hour of every day. And it's a practice. It's not, I just wake up and, hey, I'm authentic. It's that when you walk into a meeting, you have to make the choice. Am I gonna show up and let myself be seen? Am I gonna raise my hand and say, wow, y'all look super excited. I don't know what in the hell you're talking about. I'm so lost. That's a choice.
Yes,
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And to make that authentic choice, you gotta let go of
the fakeroo, I say.
Yeah.
I call it the fakeroo. But you know what? I have found, I consider myself to be an authentic person, but when I am inauthentic is when I've allowed myself to be around people who were not, and then I have to fake it to be with them.
Oh, for sure. It's contagious.
Yes. So they're faking it,
Yeah.
and you're in that situation when you do that, that kind of, you're laughing at jokes that aren't funny, you're pretending to be comfortable when you're not, and lose your own authenticity.
Yeah, and I do it. First is, let's tell a story.
Okay.
Okay.
You're a professional. I love stereotyping.
Yes, a story. Okay, so Chase and I leave this interview and we walk out and I'm talking to Kate. I'm like, thanks so much for having me, Chase. And he goes, and I'm like, so I get in my car and I'm going back to my hotel and I'm like, oh my God, I sucked. I must have screwed it up. I must have said something wrong. I never liked Chase. You know what? I don't even know why I did this. Like all of a sudden, yes or no? Yes or no,
I can't even
right?
hear those words for pretend. It
yeah,
hurts.
no. Why? Because when something hard happens, we are neurobiologically wired for one thing, and that's survival. So when something hard happens, when you show someone a piece of your work or something, or you get a dirty look or someone makes a comment, the first thing our brain does is scramble to make sense of it. And the brain recognizes the narrative structure of a story, beginning, middle, and end. So the brain wants a story that says, here's what's happening, but the story can have no uncertainty or ambiguity. Chase is maybe being a jerk. He doesn't like you. He didn't think you were very smart on the show.
Story.
I know it's a bad story. Oh, let me tell you a real story. Wait, y'all want to know a real story?
Yeah, I don't like the painful part of the big
no,
story.
Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this real story. This just happened. I spoke at HubSpot last week. Okay, 13,000 people in this Boston Convention Center. It's like 10 minutes before I go on, and I look at Twitter, and this person sends this tweet out that says, why is Brené at HubSpot? Why is at Brené Brown at HubSpot 2015? And he had just tweeted like, love Seth Godin, love Amy Schumer, all these people, but why is Brené Brown? And I'm like, oh my God, why am I at HubSpot? What am I doing here? And then I'm like, I start sweating, and it's like, and it's a convention center. It's like, ladies, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I'm the opening keynote, and I'm like, and then he tweets it again, and I'm like, oh my God. And so I'm like, these are marketing people. I don't know anything. So I start Googling on my phone, marketing terms 2015. And wait, the first term that comes up is incentivize. I'm like, I've got to work the word incentivize into this keynote. I'm like, what does that mean exactly? I don't know, but I'm going to say, we're going to incentivize. I'm like, what is happening? And I have a total crisis of confidence. Like, because shame drives 2 tapes, not good enough and who do you think you are? And I'm like, who am I? Right, snaps, terrible. And so then all of a sudden, I'm like, who is it? Because what happens when you get backed into a corner? My brain is making up this story. You don't belong here. I'm like, that story's not gonna work because I'm going on in 5 seconds. I'm like, okay, the best case scenario, attack this guy. Maybe attack him from the stage. Maybe use that as my opening. You maybe say like, John Doe, ask what I'm doing here. Well, let me tell y'all, and then I click on the tweet to figure out what his name is, and I accidentally hit the link in his tweet, and it goes to this page that says, what is Brené Brown doing at HubSpot? She's talking about vulnerability, and that's so important. Here's her TED Talk. Here are her books. Could you imagine if I would have gone out there and been like a
Dear jerk.
Yeah, totally. No, and that's a true story. It just happened because.
Can we go back to me now? It was, you were just telling a fake story about me, and it wasn't really that you were mad at me.
No.
Okay, good. Phew.
No,
Okay.
but we need to understand story. We need to understand.
There's a story and you're missing pieces? Okay.
Yes, because what happens is when something hard happens and we're captured by something difficult, our emotions get the first crack at making sense of something. A bad look, a hard phone call, a disagreement at work. We think that we're rational beings. We think that cognition is going to carry us through and make sense of it, but it doesn't. Emotions driving, thought and behavior are not even in the front seat riding shotgun. They're not even in the back seat. Thought and behavior in the trunk going, hey, and emotions driving. So the first thing we do is we tell ourselves a story that reduces ambiguity about what happened. So, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not good enough to be here. Oh, in my fake story about you, yes, I did something that pissed him off. I said something wrong. I didn't do something right. Men and women who have the greatest capacity for rising strong, in the moment something happens, they hack into that neurobiological process of making up a story. They stop and say, wait a minute, what's actually going on here? What am I feeling? What do I know for sure? Because what is a story? There's a name in research for a story that has 1 or 2 limited data points, and we fill in the rest with fear.
Wow.
It's called a conspiracy. A conspiracy is a story with limited data points. So here's what I know. I know a guy sent a tweet. I know I'm getting ready to talk. That's all I know. So now that I'm ready to ruin his career and use him as a whipping person, as I talk, what is going on? Why? Because I'm making up a story to minimize. How many of you have ever gotten in a conflict at work and you walk out of the conflict with a whole story made up about what's happening?
Put your hands up, yo.
Yeah, not rhetorical, yo. Yeah, right. Or your partner says something, like Steve the other day was like, No, I don't think. I'm like, I have nothing to wear to your party tonight. I'm so stressed out. I just got him on this book tour. And he's like, maybe we'll stay home. I'm like, do you think I'm not going to look cute at the party? Like, are you worried that I'm not going to be rocking out at the party? I'll look good at the party if we get a party. He's like, no, I'm just trying to be helpful. Like, do you not want to go? No. Look, if you want to go by the party, but you want to take somebody else to the party? He's like, okay, what's happening? Right. How many of you have ever been in that? This poor guy's looking like, is that what's happening? Is that? Yes, right. So how do we, in the moment of hard things happening, a fall, and a fall can be anything, and let me tell you for sure, a fall can be heartbreak, a fall can be failure at work, a fall can be a disappointment. But the minute something happens, emotion gets the first crack at it. And so we have to stop in that moment, and instead of conspiring, or confabulating, which is one of my favorite words from the book. What is isn't it a great word? What's a confabulation? A confabulation is a lie told honestly. And so as a social worker, we study confabulation when we talk about traumatic brain injury or we talk about dementia. So a confabulation would be, Steve's like, why don't we just stay home tonight? I know you're exhausted, you just flew in. And I'm like, you know what, dude, whatever. And then I go into my room, I call Kate, and I'm like, you don't even believe, Steve doesn't want to take me to the party because he thinks I look bad in my dress. Is that a lie?
Yeah.
Or is it is it a lie told honestly? It's what I believe.
I know, that's painful.
Right.
But it is like.
But it's a lie, right? It's
yeah,
not.
It's an
do you see how
lie.
it gets crazy? What if
and
I
you
would?
you go there at 100 miles an hour.
100
it's,
miles
it's
an
like
hour.
Transported there instantly.
Right. Okay. So that's the trick. You're 100 miles an hour. So here was what I almost did at HubSpot. I almost looked up at the person coordinating the event, and almost said before I went on stage, you know, really and truly, if you're going to have me at these events or you're going to have speakers at this event, you should really make sure that people who work for you around the country are not being hurtful. You know, could you imagine if I would have like?
Oh. And you're this close from doing it, right?
I'm that close. I got the whole speech. Because who are you when you get hurt? Like if something, let's talk about you, Chase.
Oh, no, I was afraid this was going to happen.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
So something hard happens.
Yeah.
Someone makes a really hard criticism of something you're doing with your work.
Sure.
What is the first thing that you do? What is your go-to response when something hard happens?
Is to decide if that's valid. And I read the thing and I'm like, and I generally, I've trained myself to not, but it's a response to my human, the cellular level says, I'm going to apply that filter to reality or apply that statement using my filter to reality. And my default is that this person probably knows something I don't know. And so my human response is to read it and to take it personally. And I have trained myself through reading YouTube comments. You guys done that lately? It's not pleasant.
That's not smart.
Yeah, that's not smart.
Yeah.
But I have trained myself. My response now is I go back to the arena. I go back to my little list.
Yeah.
She told me to make a little list, which is here are the people who give a shit or that you give a shit about.
Yes.
Yeah,
Me
it's so
too.
good. She's got it in her bag. So, and I'm like, okay, this person's not on the list of people that I love. And I've done this professionally for a long time. If you do any great work, you're gonna create naysayers. But the part that I'm sad at, and the part that I'm sharing here, is that it does kick off there's a little conversation that happens, even if I'm at the end like, okay, cool, you're still you got this. But I hate that I burn the cycles thinking about it.
Okay, so let's do.
This is therapy here, folks.
No, this is really helpful because I can tell you right now when something emotional happens to me, you know, some of us want to hide, and some of us come out swinging, and some of us come out people pleasing. I come out swinging.
Got it.
Like,
I would say so.
What,
I,
so
if
in that,
if
in
I
your
was given
moment,
those, if I was given
yeah.
A, B, or C, it would be like processing, and no, I'm still good. I got this, but let me show you, for sure. So I'm a swinger.
Okay.
And it's like, I don't even know you, fool. Like, pfft.
Yeah.
So, and then I would try and compensate by doing something more awesome.
But right, improving even more. So the thing
Which is a terrible thing.
It is a terrible thing because it's exhausting. Because then you're like, what am I doing? You know, now I'm on the stage making fun of somebody, putting them down. I'm probably getting them fired. And for what? Because what? Because of a tweet.
And a tweet that was actually incredibly complimentary of you
Yeah.
and your work.
Yeah. And yeah. So that thing that you do, and I know you do this because we've talked about it before, the thing where you pause and you ask hard questions is exactly what men and women do who rise strong.
All right.
They do. In those moments, they reckon with emotion. So the first step of rising strong is recognize you've been snagged by emotion and get curious about it. That's it. But how many of you were raised in families where you were encouraged to get curious about your emotions and talk about them and explore them? Right? Versus how many of you were raised in families where you were taught, hey, suck it up, push through and get it done. So the first thing is really reckoning with emotion. What am I feeling? And what do I need to know more about? That is a huge, and so that thing that you say, like, does someone know something that I don't know? Do they have information I don't have? That's a huge part of the reckoning. We just don't do it. So in that minute, in the backstage, when I was on my phone, I could have just said, whoa, Brené, you're like, heart is racing, your teeth are clenched, and you're going in for the kill here. What do you know about this?
Yeah.
Nothing. You know nothing. And what if you knew everything? Who cares? Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
You know, there are 13,000 people. You're going to spend an hour targeting one guy you don't know?
And 12,999 are going to walk out of there with their mouth wide open, like, what just happened to me? That was incredible.
But have you ever watched it? Have you ever watched someone take down someone because they were hurt?
Yeah. Oh.
What does that feel like?
It's gross.
It's so painful.
Yeah.
It's so painful. Look, I'm getting sweaty just talking about HubSpot. I'm like, really, let me tell you, when you're getting ready to go on and you look at your phone and it says, why is she here? You're like, so the first part is to reckon, but what do most of us do with emotion? Instead of reckoning, most of us offload emotion. We push it down, we numb it, we rage. We are much better at inflicting pain than feeling pain. Much better at causing hurt than handling hurt. So the first thing is we have to really reckon with emotion. We asked hundreds and hundreds of people, and we don't know a lot about emotion. We asked hundreds and hundreds of people, list every emotion you've ever felt or that you know about, that you understand. Do you know what the average number was?
Less than 10 has to be.
Guess.
5.
3.
3? Did you study before you came here?
No. The average person acknowledges that they're familiar with or know or can recognize 3 emotions or affects in themselves. Happy, sad, and pissed off.
Wow.
So how can we reckon with emotion and recognize it if we don't even know what emotion is? We weren't raised with an emotional lexicon. You know, we weren't raised to understand, wow, something is going on.
So true.
Right?
Yeah. So to take it back to 30,000 feet just for a second. If you're just joining us from somewhere out in the world, I'm Chase Jarvis. I'm sitting here with Brené Brown, and we're talking about her new book, Rising Strong. We're taking questions in just a couple minutes at #CJLive on the Facebooks and the Twitters. You folks in the in-studio audience, I know there's a lot of people taking notes and writing questions.
Y'all are note takers.
We'll get to you in just a second. But to frame the conversation again, right now you're talking about sort of one of the steps towards the process of rising strong, right? So, what was it?
Reckoning with emotion.
Reckoning, yeah, that's right. Reckoning with emotion.
Yeah, we just start with the basic premise. If you love somebody, anybody in your life, you're going to get your heart broken. If you're engaged enough in your work, in your life, you're going to get disappointed. And if you're creative enough and innovative enough, you're going to fail. So we start from the premise that you're going to fall. The question is getting back up. First thing, reckon with emotion. I'm snagged. Something's going on. And can I ask them questions?
Yeah, please do.
So how do you know when you've been snagged by emotion? Think about it. A look, or someone gives you a look, or you read a comment, or someone says something, or how do you know you're in emotion?
Nisha, what's your answer to that question? Hey, Nisha, that's my wife, Kate. You guys should know each other. That's awesome.
We said hi. So I know I'm snagged by emotion.
Can you stand up, Nisha?
Yeah. When I'm unable to see any other perspective, or there's like an emotion that's crashing around, story that's crashing around the emotion. So it's not like the purity of sensation. It's like all the sensation and, oh my gosh, I'm horrible. Oh my God, they're gonna see me. He's an asshole. You know, whatever the story is that's contracted around.
So the story's crashing around you and you've lost perspective. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that's perfect. That's exactly right. What else? What other, just think about, what is a response? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
we'll give you a mic.
please.
There you go.
It's a physical experience that is different. It's a rapid change to a different physical experience than where I was before that emotion.
Okay.
So you got heart beating and
Heart racing.
sweat.
Yeah,
Yes.
sweat,
Okay.
or happy. I mean, it can be.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be that gut clench of
Yeah,
fear.
emotions are both
Right.
sides
It
of the
can
coin.
it can be just like the world looks shinier. I feel lighter inside, just as much as it can be. I feel tighter.
So there's a physical shift.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what you're describing and what you're describing points to everything we know in the data, which is there is a physiological response to emotion. So what you're describing, some people will break down and say, I get tunnel vision. I can see only what's happening in front of me. I have no, So we have a physiological response. So men and women who have the best capacity for rising strong know the physiology of emotion. So they get tunnel vision, something shifts in them. You end up in the pantry and you don't know how you got there, but you're foraging for carbohydrates, right? You want to punch a wall. Your heart's racing, your ears are burning, my armpits tingle. There's a physiological response to emotion. So then all you need to do is get curious about it. You don't have to be like, oh, okay, shame is washing over me. I feel small and terrible. You just say, okay, man, something's going on. What is it? That's the whole first step. If you can intervene there, you can change the course of your story. The second part is that first story we make up, we have to rumble with that first story. So with the HubSpot example, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough. I don't even understand this. I don't belong here. I'm not good enough. Let's go back to this example. Okay. You and I walk out, I say, thanks for the interview, and you go, ugh, and immediately I make up a story. God, I screwed up that interview. I must have said something bad. Something must have happened. So let me tell you how that ends. The story I make up is that I did something bad, Chase is mad at me. Maybe I don't even like Chase. Well, yeah, we're not friends. It's over. That's okay. That's all right. Okay, we're done. 70% of the men and women who rise the strongest, well, all of them recognize that first story. 70% of them write it down.
Wow.
They write down the story. Why? Why would you write down the story? I have a thing on my phone called SFD. I call these stories the shitty first draft. Yeah, because Anne Lamott has this great book about writing, Bird by Bird, and she said all good writers start with a shitty first draft. Don't all good photographers start with some kind of...
You take a picture and you look at the back of your camera.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Right. So that first story that we make up is super important. It tells us everything that we don't know and everything we're afraid of. So if you own that story and you put a handle on it by writing it down and look at it, then you can ask the three biggest questions of Rising Strong. What story are you making up? What's true? And what do you really need to know more about? So how I would handle this today, I think 5 years ago, I would have gone off and said, you don't like me. I did something wrong. I'm not enough. And it could have even turned into a really big shit show, because then I could have started talking to people we both know, saying, right, do you think he's a jerk? Like, do y'all know how that goes, right? In a split second?
And before I know it, Oprah thinks I'm a jerk.
No, not possible. Not possible. But what I would do now is I would probably sit in my car, or I would sit in the dressing room, and I would be like, what story am I telling? What is going on? I'd text it myself or write it down. And then I would circle back with you and say, hey, do you have a sec? So let's just role play it. Do you have a second?
Yeah, sure. What's up?
Hey, when we were walking out of the interview yesterday, I said thanks and everything. And you kind of shrugged your shoulders and like rolled your eyes at me. And I'm making up that you're pissed off about something. Is there anything we need to clean up?
Oh my gosh, just that you thought I was mad at you for even a second. I'm not mad at all. I just remembered that I left my phone in my car.
Like, we did not practice that. But he knows that's the answer, because that's the answer 90% of the time. Like, I almost fired somebody. I was so frustrated with this person because, like, 2 or 3 meetings in a row, we'd walk out and they'd be like, and I was like, man, if you're, if this is not working for you, we can arrange something else, And then finally I just said, hey, I need to talk to you. We've been getting out of meetings for the last 2 weeks, and every time you're like huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, and I'm making up that you're unhappy, something's going on, you're feeling like, she goes, oh my God, I started Zumba a couple of weeks ago, And when I sit down now for more than 30 seconds, I'm not even kidding you, it's like my hip locks from Zumba. And I'm like, immediately I'm transported to like, I love Zumba. Where do you take Zumba? But in that minute, how many of you would have more respect for someone who said, hey, something weird happened yesterday and I'm making up that there's something going on. Can we clean it up? Is there something I need? How many would you respect?
Oh man.
A person. It's awesome. I mean,
Yep.
here's a great story. I'm in a meeting with my leadership team, and it's like a 3-hour huge meeting, and we're under a lot of stress. We're growing something big and new. It's hard. And I look down, there's 3 agenda items left, and we have like 15 minutes or something, and we're already in hour 3. People are just like, oh. So I'm like, let's just take all this stuff off except for this one thing that's tactical and in the weeds, and we got to get this stuff answered today, so let's just do it. So we start talking, and then like 5 minutes later, my CFO looks at me and says, I'm sorry, I got to interrupt. And I was like, what's up? And he said, I'm really frustrated. The story I'm making up right now is you took this off the agenda because it's not important anymore, which is fine, except for the fact that I'm spending 90% of my time and resources, as is my team, on this issue right here. So if it's not important anymore, I'd like to know about it. And I'm like, man, thank you for having the balls to do that.
Yeah, that's big time.
Because do you really want someone on your team sitting there in resentment and not listening? I said, no, I'm pulling it out because it's the most important thing on the agenda, and I will not cram it into 20 minutes. We will have another meeting where we spend an hour dedicated to just this a week. And he's like, thanks.
Awesome.
But I mean, how many times do we just sit with these stories we make up?
Why aren't we given these tools early in life? Like, that's the part that kills me, is that I'm, too old to be not knowing these things. And yet I find, and I think one of the reasons your work is so spectacularly popular is because we don't have these tools. Imagine a world in where we're given these tools as young people.
Thank you for joining us for today's 7 Super Tips episode with the one and only Brené Brown. It's all about embracing your shame and vulnerability. So, again, reminder, 7 Super Tips series, all about us talking and finding the best thought leaders and giving you their top 7 super tips that'll help unleash your inner superpower. In the meantime, keep watching, and remember, it's not what we take from this world, it's what we leave behind. Thank you for joining us for today's today's episode. She just said Brené Brown? That'd be a cool stage name for like a singer. Like Beyonce's kind of next thing. Are you ready?
Yes,
okay.
Sorry.
Your shame and vulnerability. Vulnerability. I don't know what that was. Sorry, I got it. I've got it under control.